In this video, I will briefly go through some pointers on how you can make your resume for the purpose of your summer placements. Starting from the overall structure that your resume could follow, down to each of the smaller details and some guiding principles on how to really fill them in. From the time that you join B School, up until pretty close to the shortlists coming out, creating your resume is one of the most time-consuming activities that you'll get into. Needless to say, it is of course one of the most important activities that you'll be engaging in as well. I therefore hope that this video is able to make this whole process a little easier and give you a little bit of direction to help clarify some of the questions which are bound to come up in your mind. All of the topics covered in this video and in the rest of the videos in this series are covered in a lot more detail in the notes available in the description below. I'll be covering 5 different ideas which pertain to how you can go about building your resume. The first is the purpose of the resume, or the overarching guiding principle to use while creating your resume. The second is the versions of the resume, what purpose they serve, and how you can go about creating multiple usable versions. Third, I'll be touching upon the overall structure of how your resume should look at a glance. Fourth, I'll be looking at detailing out the structure, a few principles which will help you really fill out the overall structure of your resume and ensure that each point reads fairly well. Fifth and finally, I'll be touching upon the writing style that you could implement, or just a few ideas that you should keep in mind while writing out your resume. The purpose of a resume is twofold. Firstly, it serves to get you shortlisted and get you into an interview. The second purpose is that it helps guide the interview once you are in it. The resume is the very first thing which is looked at during the interview and can often shape the direction that it will take. We are often very focused on creating resumes which get us shortlisted, and we end up packing a whole lot of information into it. However, the best resumes are those which are clean and very clearly dictate who you are and what your achievements are. Therefore, the guiding principle while building your resume should be to create a resume which very clearly guides the interview in a specific direction. Resumes which can do that are necessarily good enough to get you shortlisted. However, resumes which are good enough to get you shortlisted might not necessarily help give you a really good high quality interview. Your B School might allow you to create and submit different versions of your resume to different companies. Now, I believe that this can be leveraged in one of two ways. First, you might be able to create very different sides of your stories to present in different versions of your resume. Now, statistically speaking, I think most of us do not have so many peaks to choose from, and such distinct peaks that we would choose to include some in one version and include others in a different version. More likely, the second option that you could use is that you could reorder points from one version to another. The way in which you might do this is that you would first identify what are the main buckets or the peaks that really stand out on your resume. Build one master version with that, and then you could reorder some of the points across these buckets in each subsequent version that you create. I think that the real value that comes from this is that you keep your options open, because most likely the version of your resume which looks most impressive to one company will also be the version which looks most impressive to another company, independent of their preferences and interests. Because the version of you which is most impressive to one person is the version of you which is likely most impressive overall. While structuring your resume, there's a handful of guidelines to keep in mind. All of these guidelines matter for your resume to be easy to read and to have maximum impact on the interviewer. Firstly, bucket your points. This means that all points related to work experience come in one place, all points relating to extracurricular activities come in one place, and so on. This makes it easier for the interviewer to get in the zone and even just peruse through a few points without reading all of it and get the overall gist of what you've done in a certain area of life. Secondly, create a spine in your resume. On the left-hand side, if you have the overall headings of these sub-buckets, that makes it easy in one quick glance within maybe 10 to 15 seconds for the interviewer to get an overall idea of what all you have done and choose what to read further into and what to ask you about. This is both in their and your best interest. Third, ensure that you top load your resume. Now, this means that the buckets which are overall most interesting or where you have most of your achievements should come up slightly higher. Similarly, within those buckets, the points which are more powerful should come up higher. However, there is a limit to top loading. In a lot of sub-buckets, you will have to give context and explain what this area is or what your task was about before you can jump right into the amount of impact that you had. Fourth, arrange everything within a bucket in chronological order. This point supersedes the point on top loading. Now, a sub-bucket, which has happened a few years back but you think is more impactful, cannot really move up above a bucket which is more recent. The reason is twofold. For one, it is more likely that the things that you've done which are more impressive have happened more recently. And secondly, something which is done more recently, even if less impactful than something you've done in the past, is more interesting to the interviewer simply because it is more recent and therefore a truer picture of who you are today. Fifth and finally, limit the total number of points on your resume. This one is tough because it's tempting to cram in each and every one of our achievements in the hope that one of these points is going to get us across the finish line and shortlisted. However, most likely it is going to be the top 20 to 25 points or so of yours which will get you shortlisted. In the interview, it is only the top 10 or so points which will even catch the interviewer's eye. It's therefore important that you don't put in too many different lines in there, because that makes it tougher for the interviewer to find those points which are interesting for them and important for you to talk about. Overall, my rule of thumb would be try not to exceed 40 points at the highest in your resume. Once you have the overall resume structure in place, you can start detailing out the buckets and sub-buckets. To do this, we use the STAR framework. In a sub-bucket, first capture the situation and task or the context in one line. Do this only if the sub-bucket's heading or name doesn't already indicate what the context is. After that, get into each of your achievements and then most importantly, present the result or the overall impact you had on the main stakeholder. The total number of points in a sub-bucket should not exceed 3 in general. However, if the sub-bucket is really important to your resume on the whole, in 1 or 2 cases, you can maybe extend it up to 5 points, but I do not recommend this in general. Most importantly, from each sub-bucket, what should be very clear after reading it is the so what. Now this means that the end stakeholder, which could be the customer, your boss, or anyone else depending on the context, how were they impacted by your action or whatever else you've pointed out in the resume? This matters far more than any increase in a metric here or there. While detailing out each of the buckets, we need to pay close attention to how we write out our points. For this also, we have a handful of guidelines. The first one is to front load. This does not mean that we're going to pack in all of the action words, all of the keywords into just the first half of the sentence because interviewers do not read full sentences. They do read full sentences, but their attention is likely to dwindle off as they go through the whole sentence while still processing the first part or something earlier. Therefore, it's important to ensure that the core idea of the sentence is conveyed early on. Therefore, it might make sense to frame a sentence as improved customer retention in ABC channel by X%, rather than phrasing it as X% improvement in customer retention in ABC channel. The first example very clearly tells the interviewer that you improved customer retention in a certain channel, and they will always take any number in a resume with a pinch of salt. Therefore, they'll at least remember the core idea. In the second one, you kind of confuse them by throwing a number at them and having an awkwardly framed sentence right at the beginning. Next, we look at bolding. While bolding in your resume, do not bring in underlining, italics, and other such features. Just stick to one way of showing emphasis. Look at bolding by sub-bucket, not per line. If you start bolding a few words in each and every line, then you have a lot of words in bold. And when a lot of words are in bold, nothing's in bold. Make sure that in each sub-bucket, just a handful of words which convey the overall impact or the so what of that sub-bucket come out in bold. Finally, we look at font and color. The idea here is to keep things really simple. There should be just one font in your entire resume, not very many font sizes, and definitely not very many colors. When you're able to keep things clean and simple, it's much easier to call out attention to just those few things which matter. At the end of the day, during the interviewer is going to look at only a handful of things. A simple, clean resume makes it easier to ensure that they look at those things that you want them to look at. Those are the 5 ideas to keep in mind while preparing your resume. All of this and every other topic covered in the series are covered in a lot more detail in the notes below in the description. If this video or other videos in the series seem relevant and useful to you, do remember to like, share, and subscribe.